The studio lights blinded Maxwell as he gripped the microphone tighter than ever before. "I've been living a lie for too long," he announced to millions of viewers, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I'm gay, and the man I love is right here in my life. His name is Tristan." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the control room behind the cameras, and the producer's jaw dropped so hard Maxwell could hear it over his earpiece. In that split second, everything Maxwell had built, the polished smile, the straight guy charm that had kept Morning Light at the top of the ratings for 3 years, crumbled into dust. Yet instead of panic, a strange calm settled over him. He had rehearsed this moment in his head for months, but nothing prepared him for the way the teleprompter suddenly felt like a lifeline he no longer needed. The control room exploded into frantic activity. "Ratings just jumped 20%, someone shouted. Phones lit up across the country. Maxwell's co-host, Sarah, blinked at him with wide eyes but recovered fast enough to lean in and say, "Well, folks, you heard it here first. Maxwell just made television history." The segment continued, but the rest of the hour blurred into questions from callers who sounded equal parts shocked and supportive. By the time the credits rolled, the show's social media was on fire. Hashtags like Maxwell comes out trended within minutes. Maxwell stepped off the set feeling lighter than he had in years. Yet the real storm was only beginning. Tristan was waiting in their Brooklyn apartment when Maxwell walked through the door 2 hours later. The photographer stood by the window overlooking the East River, arms crossed, the city lights painting soft gold across his dark hair. "You did it," Tristan said quietly, voice thick with emotion. Maxwell crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled him into a tight embrace. "I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Not when every day with you felt like the only honest thing in my life." They stood like that for a long time, the hum of the city below the only sound. Tristan had been Maxwell's secret for 2 years. Stolen weekends in upstate cabins, quiet dinners where they never held hands in public, late-night texts that had to be deleted before morning. Now the whole world knew the name attached to Maxwell's heart, and the relief was dizzying. But relief never lasted long in their world. Maxwell's phone started buzzing before they even sat down to eat. His mother's number flashed first. He answered on the 3rd ring, bracing himself. "Maxwell James Carter, what on earth were you thinking?" Her voice cracked with the same southern drawl she'd carried from Georgia to New York when he was 10. "Your father is beside himself. The church group is already calling." Maxwell closed his eyes. He had known this conversation would come, yet hearing the disappointment carved a fresh wound. "Mom, I'm still your son. Nothing about that changed today." She sighed the long, weary sigh he remembered from every childhood disappointment. "We just wanted you to be happy. We never imagined this." The call ended with a promise to talk more in person, but the silence afterward felt heavier than any argument. Sarah texted next, "Boss wants you in at 6 a.m. Ratings are through the roof, but the sponsors are nervous. We've got your back, though." Maxwell showed Tristan the message, and they both laughed, short, nervous laughs that acknowledged how surreal the night had become. Tristan poured 2 glasses of wine and raised his in a toast. "To telling the truth, even when the world isn't ready." They clinked glasses, but Maxwell could see the worry lines around Tristan's eyes. Being the secret boyfriend was one thing. Becoming the public face of a national conversation was another. Maxwell pulled him close again. "We'll figure this out together. I promise." Yet even as he said it, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that promises had a way of breaking when the spotlight grew too bright. The next morning, the city woke up to Maxwell's face on every news channel. Billboards in Times Square flashed clips of his confession. Coffee shops buzzed with strangers debating whether his courage was inspiring or reckless. Maxwell walked into the studio to applause from the crew. Real, genuine applause that made his throat tighten. The producer, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, pulled him aside. "Numbers don't lie, kid. We're up 40% in the 18 to 34 demo." Keep that energy and we might just own morning TV. Maxwell nodded, but inside he felt the weight of expectation shift from hiding to performing authenticity. He had traded one mask for another, and the fit was still uncomfortable. Tristan met him for lunch at a quiet cafe in Dumbo. They sat outside under an umbrella, fingers brushing under the table because old habits died hard. People keep staring, Tristan murmured, half smiling. Maxwell glanced around and caught a few phones pointed their way. Let them stare. This is us now. They talked about everything and nothing, Tristan's latest gallery show, Maxwell's upcoming interview requests, the way the sun felt warmer today. For the first time, they didn't have to look over their shoulders. Yet Maxwell noticed how Tristan's laugh didn't quite reach his eyes. The secret they had guarded so carefully was now public property, and neither of them knew yet what that would cost. Back at the apartment that evening, Maxwell scrolled through messages from old college friends. Some offered congratulations. Others stayed silent. One name stood out, Derek, his roommate from freshman year, who had once walked in on Maxwell crying after a bad breakup with a guy he never named. Derek's text was short, "Proud of you, man. Coffee soon." Maxwell smiled for the first time all day. Maybe not everyone would turn away. He replied quickly and set the phone down, reaching for Tristan's hand across the couch. "We're going to be okay," he said, more to convince himself than anything. Tristan squeezed back, but the city lights outside flickered like they were keeping secrets of their own. The week blurred into a whirlwind of interviews and photo shoots. Maxwell's agent booked him on 3 late-night shows before Friday. Tristan tagged along to the first one, sitting in the green room with a proud but nervous smile. When Maxwell stepped on stage and the host asked, "So, how does it feel to be the most talked-about man in America?" Maxwell looked straight into the camera and answered from the heart. "It feels terrifying and freeing all at once. But mostly it feels honest." The audience erupted. Ratings for that show spiked too. By the end of the week, Morning Light had shattered its previous record, and network executives were already whispering about renewal bonuses. Maxwell should have been ecstatic. Instead, he lay awake at night wondering how long the honeymoon period would last before the backlash arrived. His mother called again on Sunday. This time his father was on the line too. The conversation was stilted, careful, like walking on broken glass. "We love you, son," his father said in that gruff voice Maxwell remembered from Little League games. We need time." Maxwell swallowed hard. "I understand. I'm not going anywhere." When the call ended, he sat on the fire escape with Tristan, watching the sunset paint the Brooklyn skyline orange and pink. "They'll come around," Tristan said softly, resting his head on Maxwell's shoulder. Maxwell wanted to believe him. He had to believe him, because if the people who raised him couldn't accept the truth, how could the rest of the world? Monday morning brought the first real crack in the fairy tale. A tabloid headline screamed across the internet, "TV host's secret boyfriend revealed. Is it all for ratings?" The article included blurry photos of Maxwell and Tristan from a weekend trip last summer, photos Maxwell thought had stayed private. The byline belonged to a former colleague who had always seemed friendly. Maxwell stared at the screen until the words blurred. Tristan read over his shoulder, jaw tight. "They're twisting everything," he said quietly. Maxwell closed the laptop. "We knew this might happen. We face it together." But deep down he felt the first real sting of betrayal, and he wondered how many more were waiting in the wings. The tabloid story spread like wildfire through the morning shows and social feeds. Maxwell arrived at the studio to find Carla waiting with a stack of printouts and a grim expression. "We can spin this," she said, "but we need a plan. Sponsors are calling. Some are thrilled, others are asking questions." Maxwell nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead to Tristan, who had stayed home claiming a headache. He knew better. The photographer hated the spotlight, and now it was burning directly on him. During the broadcast, Maxwell kept his smile bright, answered questions with practiced ease, But every commercial break he texted Tristan, "You okay?" The replies came back short and reassuring, yet Maxwell could feel the distance growing across the miles between Manhattan and Brooklyn. After the show, he skipped the usual production meeting and headed straight home. Tristan was in the darkroom they had converted from the spare bedroom, developing prints the old-fashioned way because it helped him think. Maxwell leaned against the doorframe, watching the red light wash over Tristan's focused face. "Talk to me," he said gently. Tristan didn't look up. "It's not just about me anymore, Max. It's about us. About every little moment we thought was private now being dissected by strangers." Maxwell stepped inside and wrapped his arms around Tristan from behind. "I never wanted this for you. I wanted to protect you." Tristan turned, eyes glistening. "I know. But I chose this when I chose you. I need a minute to breathe." They stood there among the hanging photographs. Images of city streets, quiet parks, and one candid shot of Maxwell laughing on a rooftop. And Maxwell felt the weight of every promise he had made. That afternoon Derek showed up at the apartment unannounced, carrying 2 six-packs and a look of genuine concern. "Figured you could use a friendly face that isn't attached to a camera," he said. They settled on the roof, the three of them, and for a while it felt like old times. Derek raised his beer. "To coming out swinging." Literally. They laughed, but the conversation quickly turned serious. Derek admitted he had suspected back in college but never pressed. "I wish I'd said something then. Maybe you wouldn't have carried it alone so long." Maxwell felt a knot loosen in his chest. Having one person from his past stand firmly in his present meant more than he could express. Tristan watched them with a small smile, and for the first time that day the tension in his shoulders eased. But the universe rarely allowed peace to last. The next morning Maxwell's mother arrived at their door with a suitcase and an expression that said she had driven through the night from New Jersey. "I needed to see you in person," she explained, hugging Maxwell so tightly he could barely breathe. She turned to Tristan and offered a handshake that turned into a tentative hug. "I'm trying," she said simply. They spent the day walking through Prospect Park, the three of them navigating awkward silences and careful questions. Maxwell's mother asked about Tristan's photography, about how they met, carefully avoiding any mention of the gay part until evening when she finally said, "Your father is scared for you, Max. The world can be cruel." Maxwell met her eyes. "It already has been, Mom. Hiding was the cruelest part." She nodded slowly, and something shifted in the air between them. Work became a double-edged sword. Ratings continued to climb, sponsors who had wavered suddenly doubled their commitments, and the network offered Maxwell a primetime special. Yet every script meeting now carried an undercurrent of expectation. Carla pulled him aside one afternoon. "They want you to lean into the story, Max. Personal segments, maybe bring Tristan on camera." Maxwell's stomach dropped. "He's not ready for that," Carla sighed. "Then find a way to keep the momentum without losing what made you authentic in the first place." The pressure settled on his shoulders like a second skin. That night he and Tristan argued for the first time since the broadcast. "I feel like I'm losing you to the ratings," Tristan said quietly, standing by the kitchen counter. Maxwell reached for him, but Tristan stepped back. "I'm not a prop, Max. I love you, but I won't be part of the show." The words stung more than any tabloid headline. Maxwell spent the next 2 days replaying the argument in his head while smiling through interviews. He canceled the primetime special citing creative differences and watched the network's enthusiasm cool slightly. Ratings dipped a fraction, nothing catastrophic, but enough for Carla to raise an eyebrow. Tristan noticed the change and showed up at the studio with coffee and an apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry I made you choose," he said as they walked along the Hudson. "I just want us to stay us." Maxwell pulled him into a quick hug right there on the walkway. "Cameras be damned. We are us. That's the only thing that matters." The moment felt like a small victory, yet Maxwell couldn't shake the feeling that bigger battles were coming. His father called that weekend. The conversation was shorter than Maxwell expected. "Your mother told me about Tristan. Sounds like a good man." Maxwell's throat tightened. "He is, Dad. The best." A long pause stretched across the line. "I'm not saying I understand everything yet. But I'm not walking away either." It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a door cracking open, and Maxwell clung to it like a lifeline. He hung up and found Tristan on the couch scrolling through old photos on his laptop. Maxwell sat beside him and rested his head on Tristan's shoulder. "My dad's trying," he whispered. Tristan closed the laptop and turned to kiss Maxwell's forehead. "That's more than a lot of people get. We're lucky." They stayed like that until the city lights came on. Two men holding onto each other while the world outside kept spinning faster than ever. The following Monday brought the first real fracture in Maxwell's inner circle. Sarah, his co-host and supposed friend, sat him down in the green room after the show. "I've been getting offers," she said carefully. "Networks want the straight ally angle. They're asking if I knew all along." Maxwell felt the floor tilt. "And what did you tell them?" Sarah looked away. "I said I had suspicions but respected your privacy. But Max, they're offering serious money for an exclusive interview." The betrayal landed like a punch he hadn't seen coming. Sarah had been the one who covered for him during secret dates, who had high-fived him after every successful show. Now she was weighing their friendship against a paycheck. "Do what you have to do," Maxwell said quietly. "Just don't pretend it doesn't hurt." She left the room without another word, and Maxwell sat there staring at the mirror where his reflection looked suddenly older. Tristan listened to the story that night without judgment, only quiet anger on Maxwell's behalf. "People show their true colors when the lights get bright," he said, pouring Maxwell a glass of whiskey. "You still have me. You still have Derek. Your mom's coming around. That's not nothing." Maxwell nodded, but the sting lingered. He had built his career on trust and chemistry, and now one of the key pieces was pulling away. The next morning he walked onto the set alone for the first time in years. Sarah smiled for the cameras, but the warmth between them had cooled. Viewers noticed. Comments flooded in asking what happened to their famous banter. Ratings held steady, but Maxwell felt the foundation cracking beneath his feet. Yet in the middle of the storm, small moments of grace appeared. A fan mailed a handwritten letter to the studio describing how Maxwell's confession had given her son the courage to come out to his own family. Maxwell read it on air the next day, voice thick with emotion. "If my story helps even one person feel less alone," he said, "then every uncomfortable moment was worth it." The studio audience clapped, and for a brief second the world felt kinder. Tristan watched the clip later and pulled Maxwell into a slow dance in their living room. No music needed. "You're changing lives, Max. Including mine." They swayed together under the soft glow of string lights Tristan had hung earlier that week, and Maxwell let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were building something stronger than the chaos around them. The letter from the fans sparked something inside Maxwell he hadn't felt since the first broadcast. He started reading viewer mail on air twice a week, turning Morning Light into a platform for honest conversations about identity and acceptance. Ratings climbed again, but this time the numbers felt secondary to the stories pouring in. Young men from small towns wrote about finally breathing easier. Parents admitted they were learning alongside their children. Maxwell saved every letter, stacking them in a box Tristan labeled, "Proof we're not alone." Yet the more public Maxwell became, the more private Tristan seemed to withdraw. He spent longer hours in the darkroom, took on assignments that kept him out of the city for days at a time. Maxwell noticed but didn't push, afraid that pressing too hard would break the fragile balance they had found. Derek became a regular fixture in their lives, showing up with takeout and bad jokes that somehow made everything lighter. One Friday night the three of them sat on the roof drinking beer and watching the sunset paint the skyline. Derek raised his bottle. To surviving the spotlight. Maxwell clinked glasses, but Tristan stayed quiet. Later, when Derek had left, Tristan finally spoke. I'm happy for you, Max. Really. But sometimes I miss when it was just us against the world, not us and the entire internet. Maxwell reached for his hand. It's still us. The world just gets to watch now. Tristan nodded, but the worry line between his brows didn't smooth out. Maxwell filed the conversation away, promising himself he would find a way to give Tristan back the quiet they both craved. The network scheduled a live town hall special for the following month. Maxwell agreed on one condition. No forced drama, no bringing Tristan on stage unless he wanted to be there. Carla agreed, but Maxwell could see the dollar signs in her eyes. He threw himself into preparation, reading more letters, practicing answers that felt true rather than polished. Tristan helped by taking new headshots, professional yet warm, the kind that showed Maxwell as a man in love rather than a headline. During one session in the studio after hours, Tristan lowered the camera and simply looked at him. "You're glowing," he said softly. Maxwell smiled. "That's because I finally stopped hiding." They kissed right there under the same lights that had once felt like spotlights of judgment, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. The first crack in the new normal came from an unexpected direction. Maxwell's father showed up in New York without warning, suitcase in hand, looking older than Maxwell remembered. They met at a diner near the studio, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that never got cold. "Your mother thought I should see this life you're living," his father said, stirring sugar into his cup. Maxwell waited, heart hammering. His father continued, "I watched the show yesterday. You sounded sure of yourself." The words were simple, but they carried years of unspoken tension. Maxwell swallowed. "I am sure, Dad." For the first time. His father nodded slowly. "Then I guess I need to get sure too. Took me a while to realize love is love, no matter what." Maxwell felt tears prick his eyes and didn't bother hiding them. They talked for 2 hours about baseball and politics and everything except the one thing that had divided them, until the very end when his father said, "Bring Tristan to dinner tomorrow. I'd like to meet him properly." The dinner went better than Maxwell had dared hope. His mother cooked her famous lasagna, and his father asked Tristan about photography with genuine curiosity. There were awkward pauses but no outright rejection. When the evening ended, his father clapped Maxwell on the shoulder. "He's a good man. I can see why you fought for him." The words settled like a warm blanket over Maxwell's heart. On the cab ride home, Tristan rested his head on Maxwell's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a family again." Maxwell kissed his temple, feeling for the first time that maybe the pieces were finally clicking into place. Yet peace never lasted in their new reality. Sarah's interview with a rival network aired the next week, and while she never said anything cruel, her careful wording painted Maxwell as someone who had hidden his truth for ratings all along. The internet divided overnight. Some defended him fiercely. Others questioned every smile he had ever given on camera. Maxwell read the comments until Tristan gently closed the laptop. "You can't live in their heads, Max. You have to live in ours." They spent the night on the couch watching old movies, Tristan's fingers tracing lazy circles on Maxwell's arm, and Maxwell let himself be anchored by the one person who had never asked him to be anything but himself. The town hall special arrived faster than Maxwell expected. The studio filled with audience members holding signs that read everything from "We love you, Max," to "God still loves you." Maxwell stood center stage, heart steady for the first time in weeks. He answered questions honestly about fear, about love, about the long road to self-acceptance. When a teenage boy asked, "How do I tell my parents?" Maxwell looked straight at the camera and said, "You tell them when you're ready, and you remember you're never alone." The applause that followed felt different, warmer, deeper. Backstage, Tristan waited with open arms. "You were incredible," he murmured. Maxwell held him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of developer chemicals and cologne. "We were incredible." The following morning, the ratings report showed another record high. Carla burst into his dressing room with champagne. You did it again, kid. The network wants to expand the show. More segments, bigger platform. Maxwell accepted the congratulations, but his mind was already on the weekend getaway he had secretly planned for Tristan. He wanted one weekend where no cameras followed, no headlines waited. When he surprised Tristan with plane tickets to a cabin in the Adirondacks, the photographer's face lit up like the city skyline. "Just us?" Tristan asked. "Just us," Maxwell promised. They drove north that Friday, windows down, singing along to the radio like teenagers. For 3 glorious days they hiked, cooked terrible meals, and loved each other without an audience. Maxwell felt the tension of the past months melt away under the pine trees. They returned to the city recharged and closer than ever. Maxwell walked into the studio Monday morning ready for whatever came next. But the universe had one more test waiting. An anonymous tip had reached the tabloids. Old college photos of Maxwell and a male friend, arms around each other at a party, captions twisted to suggest something more than friendship. The story ran with the headline "Maxwell's Secret College Romance Exposed." Maxwell stared at his phone in disbelief. The friend in the photo had been straight, had married years ago, and now his family was being dragged into the mess. Maxwell called him immediately, apologizing profusely. The man was gracious but clearly shaken. "I support you, Max. But my kids are getting questions at school." The guilt landed heavy in Maxwell's stomach. He had wanted freedom for himself, but freedom had ripples. Tristan found him on the fire escape that evening, staring at the river. "This isn't your fault," he said, sitting beside him. Maxwell shook his head. "Every time I think we're safe, something new drags someone else down." Tristan took his hand. "Then we keep standing up. Together. That's how we win." Maxwell looked at the man beside him, the one who had never asked for fame, only love, and felt a surge of determination. "Together," he echoed. They sat there until the stars came out, 2 silhouettes against the glowing city, refusing to let the world dim what they had built. The college photo scandal died down faster than Maxwell expected, thanks in large part to the friend publicly stating he supported Maxwell's journey. The gesture restored some faith in humanity, but the experience left scars. Maxwell became more protective of the people he loved, turning down interview requests that involved Tristan and limiting how much personal detail he shared on air. Ratings stayed high, people tuned in for the honesty, not the drama, but Maxwell could feel the network growing restless for bigger moments. Carla hinted at a possible documentary, and Maxwell politely declined. "My life isn't entertainment," he told her. She respected the boundary, but he saw the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Tristan's gallery show opened the following weekend in Chelsea. Maxwell sat in the front row, heart swelling with pride as Tristan spoke about capturing moments of quiet courage in everyday life. The photographs on the walls told stories without words. 2 men holding hands on a subway, a father hugging his son after a difficult conversation, a single candle burning in a window on Pride Night. Maxwell knew some of those images were inspired by their own journey. After the opening, they slipped away to a small Italian restaurant where no one recognized them. Over pasta and red wine, Tristan raised his glass. "To the life we're actually living, not the one on screen." Maxwell clinked his glass and meant every word. Yet the calm before the next storm never lasted. Maxwell's agent called Monday morning with news that shook him to the core. A major streaming service wanted to option his story for a limited series, complete with creative control and a generous payout. The catch: they wanted Tristan's involvement as a consultant and on-screen interviews. Maxwell hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. When he told Tristan that evening, the photographer went very still. "They want to turn us into content, Max. I thought we were past that." Maxwell reached for his hand. "We don't have to do anything. I turned it down already." Tristan looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you. I just want our story to stay ours." They spent the night talking about the future, maybe buying a house upstate, maybe starting a small foundation for LGBTQ youth. For the first time, Maxwell let himself dream beyond the next rating cycle. The dream shattered 2 days later when an email from an anonymous studio source landed in Maxwell's inbox. It contained screenshots of internal network emails discussing how to maximize the Maxwell narrative for the fall sweeps. One line stood out: "If the boyfriend won't cooperate, we may need to create narrative tension." Maxwell's blood ran cold. He forwarded the emails to Tristan without comment. The reply came quickly: "We need to talk." They met at their favorite bench in Central Park, the same bench where they had shared their first kiss 2 years earlier. Tristan looked exhausted. "I can't keep wondering if every kind gesture from the network is actually calculated. I love you, but I won't be part of a machine that uses us." Maxwell felt panic rise in his throat. "Then I walk away. I'll quit the show." Tristan shook his head. "That's not the answer either. You've built something important here. People are listening because of you." They sat in silence until the sun dipped behind the trees. Finally, Tristan said, "We fight smarter, not harder. Together." The next morning, Maxwell walked into Carla's office and laid the printed emails on her desk. "I want transparency or I walk," he said quietly. Carla read them once, twice, then met his eyes. "I didn't know about this, but I'll fix it." She called an emergency meeting with the network president, and by afternoon new contracts were drawn up guaranteeing Maxwell final approval on any personal storylines. It wasn't perfect, but it was protection. Maxwell left the building feeling lighter, yet the experience had cost him something precious: trust in the very system that had elevated him. That weekend his parents visited again. His father brought a 6-pack of Maxwell's favorite beer and an awkward but sincere hug for Tristan. They spent Saturday at the Museum of Modern Art, walking slowly through the galleries while Tristan explained composition and light. Maxwell watched his father listening intently and felt a quiet joy he hadn't expected. Sunday morning his mother pulled him aside in the kitchen. "I was wrong to worry so much," she said. "Seeing you two together, I understand now." Maxwell hugged her tightly, years of tension dissolving in that single embrace. When his parents left that afternoon, Tristan stood beside him waving goodbye and whispered, "We're building something real here, Max. Something that lasts." The network special aired the following week without any forced drama. Maxwell spoke from the heart about love, fear, and the courage it took to be honest. Tristan watched from the audience, and when the segment ended he stood up and clapped louder than anyone. Backstage they found a quiet corner and kissed like no one was watching, because in that moment, no one else mattered. The ratings hit another record, but Maxwell barely glanced at the numbers. He was too busy planning a small trip to the beach for just the two of them, a place where the only spotlight was the sun. Yet the universe had one more lesson in store. On the morning of their departure, Maxwell received a call from Sarah. Her voice was small. "I turned down the other network. I realized I was losing my best friend over money." "I'm sorry, Max." He accepted the apology, and something in his chest loosened. They agreed to meet for coffee the next week, no cameras, no agenda. When he told Tristan the news, the photographer smiled for the first time in days. "See, people can change." They packed the car and drove to Montauk, windows down, music loud, the future stretching out ahead of them like the open road. The beach house was small and perfect. They walked the shore at sunset, barefoot in the sand, talking about everything and nothing. Tristan stopped suddenly and turned to Maxwell. "Marry me," he said simply. Maxwell's heart stopped. "What?" Tristan laughed softly. "Not right now. Not with cameras. Just someday. When we're ready. I want forever with you." Maxwell pulled him close, waves crashing around their ankles. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They kissed as the sky turned pink and orange. Two men who had survived the storm and found their way to each other on the other side. The proposal on the beach became their secret. No rings yet, no announcements. just a quiet promise that carried them through the weeks that followed. Maxwell returned to the studio with renewed energy, and the show hit its stride in a way that felt authentic rather than manufactured. Sarah came back fully, their on-air chemistry warmer than ever because it was real again. Viewers noticed the difference and responded with record engagement. Maxwell read letters on air every Friday, each one reminding him why he had taken the risk in the first place. Tristan worked on a new series of photographs titled After the Spotlight, capturing quiet moments of couples who had found their way through similar journeys. The gallery owner called it his best work yet. Yet the biggest test arrived without warning. Maxwell's old college ex, the one he had never named publicly, reached out through a mutual friend. The message was short. "We need to talk. It's important." Maxwell agreed to meet at a small cafe in the village. The man, now married with 2 kids, looked nervous. "I've been getting calls from reporters. They're digging into our past. I just wanted you to know I'm not ashamed." But my family, Maxwell assured him, the past would stay in the past. They parted with a handshake and a shared understanding that some stories belonged to both of them. Maxwell walked home feeling the weight of every decision he had ever made. When he told Tristan that night, the photographer listened without jealousy, only quiet support. "You handled it with grace," he said. "That's who you are now." The network decided to throw a black tie gala to celebrate the show's milestone ratings. Maxwell and Tristan arrived together, hands clasped openly for the first time at a public event. Cameras flashed, but the stares felt less hostile, more curious. Derek was there, along with Maxwell's parents and a handful of close friends. Sarah gave a toast that brought tears to Maxwell's eyes. "To the man who taught us all that honesty is the best ratings boost." Laughter rippled through the room. Tristan squeezed Maxwell's hand under the table. Later, on the dance floor under soft lights, they moved together slowly, ignoring the phones pointed their way. "This is what I fought for," Maxwell whispered. Tristan smiled against his shoulder. "This is what we built." The morning after the gala, Maxwell woke to the sound of his phone buzzing non-stop. A major newspaper had published an in-depth profile, positive, thoughtful, focusing on his journey from fear to freedom. The article included a quote from Tristan. "Maxwell didn't just come out for himself. He came out for every kid who's still hiding." Maxwell read it twice, heart full. He found Tristan in the kitchen making coffee and pulled him into a slow kiss. "You're incredible," he said. Tristan laughed softly. "We both are." They spent the day doing ordinary things. Grocery shopping, walking the dog they had adopted 3 months earlier, planning the small wedding they now spoke about openly. The future felt bright and possible. But the universe had saved its final curveball. An anonymous source leaked an old email chain from Maxwell's first year on the show, messages where producers had discussed keeping his image straight for marketability. The emails were real, and they painted the network in an unflattering light. Social media exploded. Some called for boycotts. Others defended Maxwell as the victim of the very system he had challenged. Maxwell sat in Carla's office as she read the leaked emails on her screen. "This wasn't you," she said quietly. "But it's our mess now." Maxwell looked at her steadily. "Then we clean it up. Together. No more secrets." Carla nodded. They called an emergency press conference for that afternoon. Maxwell stood at the podium with Tristan by his side, both of them choosing transparency over damage control. "I didn't know about these emails when I started," Maxwell said clearly. "But I stayed silent longer than I should have because I was scared. Today I'm choosing truth over ratings." He read a prepared statement acknowledging the harm caused by the old culture and announcing new internal policies for inclusivity. Tristan spoke next, voice steady. "Love isn't a marketing tool. It's the reason we're all here." The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then applause broke out. Cameras flashed. Maxwell reached for Tristan's hand right there on live television, and the image went viral within minutes. The backlash came, but so did an outpouring of support. Sponsors who had wavered renewed their contracts. The network president issued a public apology and committed real resources to LGBTQ initiatives. Maxwell and Tristan spent the evening at home, phones turned off, simply holding each other. "We survived," Tristan said softly. Maxwell kissed his forehead. "We did more than survive. We changed the game." They fell asleep to the sound of the city outside, two men who had faced every test and come out stronger. The following week Maxwell received an unexpected offer, a position as executive producer of a new daytime talk show focused entirely on stories of acceptance and growth. The network gave him full creative control. He accepted on the condition that Tristan could consult on visual storytelling. When he told his parents, his father actually cheered. His mother cried happy tears. Derek threw a small celebration at their apartment, and Sarah hugged Maxwell so tightly he laughed. In the middle of it all, Tristan pulled him aside. "Ready for the next chapter?" Maxwell looked at the man he loved and smiled. "With you, always." The new show launched in the fall to strong reviews and steady ratings. Maxwell stood on the set the first morning feeling a different kind of excitement, one rooted in purpose rather than survival. Tristan had designed the set himself, warm lighting and comfortable couches that invited real conversation. The first guest was a young man who had come out to his military family, and Maxwell listened with the empathy of someone who had walked the same road. When the segment ended, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Backstage, Tristan waited with 2 coffees and a proud smile. "You're exactly where you're meant to be," he said. Maxwell kissed him quickly, tasting the future on his lips. They married that spring in a small ceremony in the Adirondacks, surrounded by family and close friends. Maxwell's father walked him down the makeshift aisle. Tristan's sister read a poem she had written. Derek was best man and managed not to cry until the vows were finished. When Maxwell slipped the ring onto Tristan's finger and whispered, "Forever," the word felt like coming home. They danced under strings of lights as fireflies blinked around them. Two men who had fought the world and won each other. The photos Tristan took later, candid, joyful, full of light, became the first images in a new series he titled The Life We Chose. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both extraordinary and beautifully ordinary. Maxwell's show continued to grow, touching lives across the country. Tristan's photography exhibitions drew crowds who saw themselves in the frames. They bought a house in upstate New York with a studio for Tristan and a home office for Maxwell. Weekends were for hiking, cooking terrible recipes, and planning the foundation they started to support LGBTQ youth in conservative communities. Maxwell's parents visited often, his father now bragging about "my son-in-law the artist" to anyone who would listen. Sarah became a regular guest host and a true friend again. Derek moved closer and started dating someone who made him laugh the way Tristan made Maxwell laugh. One crisp autumn evening, they sat on their back porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and orange. Tristan rested his head on Maxwell's shoulder. "Remember the night you came out on live TV?" Maxwell chuckled softly. "How could I forget? Best and scariest decision of my life." Tristan turned to look at him, eyes shining. "It led us here. To this. To us." Maxwell pulled him closer, breathing in the scent of pine and home. "I'd do it all again. Every single second." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. Two men who had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other every single day, even when the world tried to pull them apart. Years later, when young viewers wrote asking how they had made it through the hardest parts, Maxwell and Tristan answered the same way every time. By refusing to hide, by leaning on each other, and by believing that honesty always wins in the end. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, messy, and deeply human. And in the end, that was what mattered most. True or false? Publicly embracing your true identity always brings more joy than hiding it forever.